Hey there guys, Mr. Myas is here, and in this video I'm going to talk about bias and how do we reduce bias. What kind of bias are we going to see sometimes in our sample studies or our observational studies or our surveys. So what types of bias are there and how do we reduce those? So let's take a look. Alright, so let me make myself smaller. There I am, down on the bottom now. Let's hashtag don't be biased, guys. We need to avoid bias. So let's see, in this video you should be able to identify some of the common types of bias that we see a lot of times in AP Stats. So let's take a look here. First thing I need to talk about is some vocabulary. A population versus sample. You've heard me talk about this a while in class. A population. So first thing, a statistic is summary information taken from a sample. So like the mean or the standard deviation, which we'll go over later on in this class. And a parameter is summary information taken from a population. So the entire population. We can still find the mean and the standard deviation, but they're given different variables. Okay, so you just need to make sure you understand the difference between a population and a sample, and a parameter and a statistic, which we'll do more of later. Okay, so what types of bias do we have? The first type of bias I want to talk about is response bias. Now, response bias is when there's actual bias in the wording or the wording of the question that influences a response either way, either yes or no or whatever you want. So let's say that we want to know if we want to do a survey to see if teachers should be playing music during class when students are doing work. So if I sent out a survey and in the survey the wording said, knowing that music helps students focus and it calms their nerves, should students be allowed to listen to music in class during classwork? Now the problem with that question is that that first part of that sentence makes us lean towards saying yes. Well, how do I look if I say no to that? Well, I don't want kids to be focused and calm their nerves. See, that's it's what some people call a loaded question, right? You're influencing what the answer is going to be. That's response bias. Man, this is one of the most common types of bias that you see all over the place. So just watch the news, you'll see it all the time. All right, then we've got something called voluntary response bias. This is another bias that's really, really popular because all it takes is taking volunteers. So if we just put like the online poll, let's say we went to Spotify and we put an online poll and said to Spotify users that I have, hey, let me know or answer this question for me, or any online poll, right? You put the question poll up and you say, do you think students should be allowed to listen to music during class work? The only people that are going to answer that are the people that are on that website, or those are your friends on Facebook or Instagram or whatever you put that poll on. The only people that are going to do it are the people that want to do it. So you're only really going to get one type of answer. You're probably, well, two types really. You're going to get either people that really, really like what you're saying or people that really, really don't like what you're saying. Either way, you're not going to get a good representative sample. You're just going to get volunteers to do it. So anybody can participate. That's not very good information. The next up is convenience sample. Now, a convenience sample usually will end up getting some of this other type of bias later on that I talk about in just a second. But convenience is basically really, just think of the word convenience. It's convenient. They're the participants that are right in front of you, that are easy to take. There's really no randomness involved. I'm just taking those people in my survey. So if they're convenient, that's a convenient sample. It's not a very good sample because it really doesn't, again, it misses a lot of people. And you'll see that often in terms of what we call undercoverage or non-response. Now, undercoverage happens when the sample, we lose a lot of people in that population and they're less represented. So we want to make sure that we try to get as good a representation as possible. Right, I talked about this in our sample video. Our sample wants to be a good sample. It doesn't need to be the entire population, but it needs to be enough that it's a representative sample. And if we're missing a large part, if we're missing a part of that population, then we're going to have undercoverage. So this would happen, let's say I am doing the same survey on students, whether or not their teachers should be able to play music in classroom during their classwork, and I decided to ask all AP classes as my survey group. So I've asked a lot of students, but if you think about AP classes, there's only one freshman AP class, at least in my school, but there are several junior and senior AP classes. So we're really getting an unbalanced sample here where it's biased towards the 11th and 12th graders and not the freshmen. So we have what we call undercoverage. That's slightly different than what we call non-response bias. Now, non-response bias happens when a large fraction of the sample fails to respond in the first place. So let's say I take a random sample of 12th graders, or I take a sample of 12th graders. I'm going to do 12th graders at the school, but it so happens that day there are tons of people out on a field trip. That's a little bit of both undercoverage and non-response because I'm missing all those students and I get a non-response. But that's a large fraction of those that sampled that failed to respond. We also have non-response bias happen a lot of time with voluntary response bias. So if I sent out a mailer, I randomly selected parents to take my poll this time, but I only got back a certain amount of responses from the parents. Well, then I have non-response bias. They did not respond, right? It is kind of voluntary, but I first randomly selected them, so I kind of missed the voluntary there, but they didn't respond to my survey, so that's non-response bias, okay? So each of these can overlap as well, but these are the 5 types of bias that we see most often and that you'll probably most likely be tested on the AP exam. All right, catch you guys later. Bye.